I cannot hear you, David, but that's okay. I'm going to keep talking and say hello to everyone. It's good to be here with you for the second session that we're looking at surfing the wave, how to use contemporary culture to proclaim the gospel to today's society. And crucial session, I think, in saying how do we unpack and use the things that are already there. I don't know if David's back on, but if he's not, I'll keep going.
No, I think I'm on. I can hear you if you can hear me.
Yeah.
It's good. Oh, good. In Perth, they have the technology. That's wonderful.
It just arrived from Perth. And sorry if people listening from Perth here, we're putting ourselves down self-deprecating ways. But Dave, today's session is a follow-up to the last week, and I want to go through, or to last Monday's there. I want to go through a little bit of material that we've got to look at to explain what are the touch points in our culture that we can use and how to use them. We called today Surfing the Wave. What do you mean by surfing the wave as we use contemporary culture? Can you encapsulate that for me?
Yeah, okay. It's a very simple idea. I think there's a tendency as Christians, we watch where the society's going, we see the tide coming in, if you like, and King Canute-like, we try and stand there and stop it happening. By the way, did you know that the King Canute story is a myth? This is when you know your history. The reason he went down to the waves was to show his people, do you think I can stop the waves?
Oh, right. So the opposite of what he was saying.
Yeah, absolutely. From what he was trying to, what they were saying, he's saying, I'm just the king. He's saying, I'm not Donald Trump. You know, I can't do everything. Sorry, that was a political comment.
That's a political comment. Come on, surf the wave, David.
Well, we surf the wave, and the way we do that is you look at cultural things and you say, okay, how does this lead and point to Christ? So we have a lot of people who are on this who maybe are involved in media, and they're thinking, well, if I'm not mentioning Jesus every second sentence, in what sense am I doing anything? And I'm saying, well, there's certain things that you're doing. So I'm just going to remind you of some of the presuppositions we have here. Number one is it is all about Jesus. So you've got to remember that. It's not about getting Christendom back. Number two, we're doing four things. We're showing that Christianity is reasonable. We're showing it's beautiful. We're showing it's good, and we're showing it's true. And there's a lot there. It's like every salvation is a link of 1,000 chains. Well, for me, every way that we communicate Christ, there's just 1,001 ways to do it. So, Steve, I'm going to ask you three things, and then what we're going to do is you can ask me as well, and then we're going to go on to those of you who are listening, because we really do want to get your input on this and get some questions. We'll go over to our presenters once you and I have just had these questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of the context of what we are doing, can you just give us one thing that you think about the current culture and society that is a key or a door to presenting the gospel?
Yeah, look, I'm going to show that through a slide. I've got these slides up here, hoping that there's our third space slide. And part of just to remind you that we thought why we're doing speaking about Jesus in the culture in a third space, a place that is a safe space to have conversations, which seem to be fewer places than previously. Certainly doesn't seem to be on social media that much at the moment. It's a very hot place. But this next picture blows me away. This is absolutely fantastic. That's Iggy Pop at the Sydney Opera House at a concert that he was at last year. And there's something Caravaggio about that. It's very visceral kind of photograph. It won an international award, that photograph. Iggy Pop invited the crowd to come on the stage after he had sung a song. And the guy in the blue striped shirt next to him is his manager, trying to hold certain things at bay and people at bay. But you see that hand touching his stomach, his very wrinkled stomach. Yeah. It's amazing. It's something visceral about that photograph. And do you know what the name of the photograph is, David? Let me tell you the name. It's called,
what is it?
It's called Mark 5:28. And I'm going to read Mark 5:28 to you. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. It's a riff off the story of the woman with the issue of blood touching Jesus. Mm. And it's an amazing picture because it speaks of the one thing that I think is an entry point at the moment in our culture, especially in our Western culture where material promise hasn't delivered as it said it would. And that's the desire for something transcendent, something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And that photograph shows a very materialistic, earthbound photograph. It's incarnational in many senses. There's a lot of meat in that photograph, but there's a desire for something more. Look at the hands pointed heavenwards. Look at Iggy's hands pointed heavenwards. And one of his songs is called Lust for Life. And I kind of feel that picture could be called Lust for Eternal Life. People are looking for something transcendent. Now, I want to show another picture to you now, which says the same thing, which is much, much older. So bear with me with this idea of transcendence, because I think that the idea to look for something beyond this age and this world is a key, almost an unspoken desire in our culture, and this photograph shows it. But this next picture is from a painting by El Greco called The Opening of the Fifth Seal of St. John the Apocalypse. And it's a picture set, there's St. John on the island of Patmos, and there are the saints who are going to receive white robes for their faithfulness. And this was painted in 1604 as an altar painting above an altar in Spain. And there is St. John with his hands ecstatically and his face ecstatic, looking to the heavens. Mm-hmm. Except there's nothing there, because the painting's now in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and apparently the top 5 feet of that painting has been torn off and lost. And the top 5 feet of that painting was apparently the risen, resurrected, reigning, ruling Jesus on a throne, looking down at St. John, and John's there ecstatically looking up like that. Mm-hmm. But somehow it's been ripped off. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a fantastic metaphor for people's desire in our culture, that they're looking for something more, but they're feeling a bit ripped off in the secular world because we haven't got anything transcendent to offer them beyond a beautifully transcendent car driving down a coastline to beautiful music with beautiful people driving it, to give you that sort of oomph factor. And there's those hands held up like that, looking for something transcendent. And transcendence in our culture could go from a material object to the search within you for the true self. And the culture is swinging on an issue of transcendence at the moment. I think that is an in for our culture. I really do. Thoughts on that, Dave? Do you see where I'm driving at with that?
I do see where you're driving it, and it is an in, and there's lots of different ins. Now, if you're going to talk to people about transcendence, they're going to go, what do you mean? It's kind of, you talking about transcendence, you do look like an old hippie, and they're going to say, oh, yeah, man, just peace, cool, it's transcendent. But I know exactly what you mean. We're talking about something beyond. We're talking about, is that it? Is this all there is?
Yeah, that's a very important question. Is that all there is to it? And that's probably what I'm getting at. You wouldn't want to say the word transcendence in that sense. You'd say to people, don't you think at the best moments in your life you're going, yeah, there still has to be something more beyond this that makes this worthwhile and meaningful. And I think that's a point in the Western culture at the moment that's very important to pitch into.
Let me give you an example that's from this week. Mm-hmm. So Donald Trump stood with the Bible. He used it as a political prop. People can have their views about that one way or the other. I'm not going to get into that. But I don't know if you've seen this, Steve. James Corden did a wee clip about that with his dad. Now, his dad is a good old-fashioned, what we called coal porter. In other words, he actually went round selling Bibles door to door or to churches and other things. And so James Corden got his dad, who's a Bible-believing Christian, to come on and say how you should hold a Bible. And it was a very, very clever piece. But his dad got his son, because his son obviously wanted him to make a bit of fun. This is how you hold a Bible. It's a bit lighthearted. You hold the underarm one the various ways, But the son said at the end, I'm just wanting to read you something from Psalm 37. It's 11 verses. I hope that's not too much. And he wasn't going to say no to his dad. So we got Psalm 37. It was beautiful. It was just a wonderful. And I just thought, there's a connection, because, all right, there's the political. There's people wanting to have a go at President Trump. There's people wanting to defend President Trump. There's Corden wanting to make humor out of it. And there's his dad who took it to, here's the word of God. And the whole thing changed. And I just thought, I wanted to hug the man. I just thought he was genius. Did you see that? Yeah.
I saw a lot of people showed it to me. And what struck me about it was, what I talked about the other day was, it was abductive. All the guns of Maginot Line were pointing this direction: humour, politics, having a go at someone, getting ratings. And someone came in who was almost without guile, and he sort of cut across the whole story. It felt like a real transcendent moment, especially when James said at the end, "I love you, Dad." James Corden says to his father, and there is a man who's a bit of a superstar in the media, humbled almost by his father reading these verses from Psalm 37.
Listen, guys, I have a theory, and for those of you who are involved in professional media or entertainment and all the rest of it, I have come across an astonishing number of journalists, presenters, musicians, actors who have some kind of church, and very often evangelical church background. And I think there are various reasons for that. Number one is we're very creative people. Many of them have turned away from the faith, but there's something that still remains there. And you can see that even with James Corden. Steve, I don't want us to get lost in this. I mean, these are two good examples. We're talking about how we actually do this. So we're giving some examples of the culture. Can you just give me one example or a couple of examples, and we'll keep it short because I want to get to the questions, of stuff that you have done and, that's worked?
Oh, that's worked. Yeah, maybe I'm talking about when I write something, say a blog post about a deep human issue in my own life that was given meaning, but not all the answers by my understanding of who Jesus is. Just telling that story has sparked interest in people who aren't Christian, because they want to know, how does that work? How can I pull that lever of spirituality in such a way that it changes lives? And I think that's something, that's one area that I've seen it work. And just day to day, I think one of my friends who I run with has been struck with cancer, and he's been out walking with me, and he's not a Christian. And he's been out walking because he can't run at the moment. And he wants to know the big answers to the questions, because he said, you seem to know those answers in a way that I've sort of put them off all my life. And what are you saying? And what I decided not to say was not to give him sort of the smooth answer, but to go a little bit clunky and say, I actually believe there's more to this world than you can see, that your desire for your running and for your business and for your relationships, all of which he's pursued to varying successes, is pitched at a desire greater than you can even articulate. But let me tell you about the one who did come down from a transcendent place to explain that. And he texted me this week. He's had cancer in his mouth, so he hasn't been able to speak, but he's about ready to speak again. He said, I think we need to have that walk and speak. So I think that for me, I want to see both in my writing and public life that I can articulate that, but I also want to see it in my private life with my friends that I can articulate it as well. But I always start with that desire aspect, because I think part of that, what you were talking about with Blaise Pascal and the comment about the marriage, wooing us with a marriage proposal, I think that's a really good place to start in our culture at the moment, in the way we shape narratives. What about you, Dave? Where have you seen it work? We've both worked in church ministry for a long time. Have you seen it in your media ministry and your church ministry?
Yeah, both. I mean, basically, we're fishers of men.
Yeah.
Right? So you need bait.
Yeah.
I don't think you need manipulation.
You don't need bait and switch. You need bait and switch.
Yeah. And you need to arouse people's interest. You need to do various things. So I had a basic rule with the media that if ever a journalist asked me to make a comment, I would. And I know a lot of my colleagues had the opposite rule because they didn't want to be caught out. But I thought also as an opportunity, and I'll give you one example. One day I got a phone call from a local journalist in Dundee, where I was at the time. And he was actually, the local paper was quite big. And he said, Dave, I want a comment from you. I said, on what? He said, there's a comedian coming to town, going to the Whitehall Theatre, and they're doing their Christ on a Bike tour. He says, so I want to comment. I said, I'm not giving you a comment. And he says, oh, Dave, you always give us a comment. I said, no, I'm not giving you a comment. I said, you just want Free Church Minister condemns. That's what you want to put in your headline. I said, you've written the headline already, so you're not getting a comment. He says, oh, please, Dave, please, I can't. And I thought about it, and I said, all right, I'm going to give you a comment, but you've got to be fair. And he says, what's the comment? I said, my comment is this. The comedian is coming to do his comedy show at the Whitehall Theatre. And I don't care. I'm not going to condemn him. And if people want to go and see him, they can. That's fine. I won't be going. I don't think it's very original. I said, however, on the opposite side of the street is my church. And we have an Australian band called Sons of Korah, which some of you watching this may know. And they're going to be doing a musical concert singing the songs of the Bible, the Psalms. So I'm going to issue a challenge. The people of Dundee have a choice. On the right-hand side of the street, they can go to the theatre and blaspheme Christ, or on the left-hand side, they can come and they can praise him. And I said, let's see who gets the biggest audience. That's my challenge. Let's see what the people of Dundee want. And the journalist said, I love it. I love it. And so he put it out as a challenge. He put it out. It was going to be a 1-paragraph thing. He put it out as a kind of 2-page special. And then because of that, the journalist turned up with a photographer at our concert. And then there was another journalist, and she listened to them, and she said, wow, that doesn't sound like Christian music. I says, what do you mean? She said, well, isn't Christian music kind of bland? She says, they're brilliant, these guys. I said, they are brilliant. And we were packed. Yeah. And I said, how did they get on at the Whitehall Theatre? She said, they wouldn't let us in. I said, well, I've got a source there, and I can tell you that they've been going around the old folks' homes trying to bus people in for free. But I said, we won this challenge by a mile. And then she said, you know, do you like this music? And I said, actually, I love Sons of Korah, but I'm not the biggest fan of Christian music. For those who are watching, I've repented a little bit. I've come across some really good Christian bands, but just at that point, I hadn't. So I said, I'm not the biggest fan. I said, I prefer Led Zeppelin. You know what the headline was the next day?
It's something about Stairway to Heaven, surely.
No, it was Minister Prefers Led Zeppelin. My congregation, I just thought, oh no. But we got 2 pages worth of publicity. Yeah. And we got a really good relationship with the journalist. It was a bit of fun, but it also got across the serious point. We can blaspheme Christ or we can praise Christ. So there's an example for you.
Yeah. And in one sense, it's about leaning into something. I think that's probably what I would say is lean in hard where the culture is without being offensive. Because people genuinely are asking questions. It's not as if everyone assumes. Yeah. And this is where Tim Keller would have said, you know, 50 years ago when Billy Graham was speaking, he was telling you've got to do what you know is right. You have to repent because you know you're a sinner and things like that. And you could start a lot further along the track. Mm-hmm. Now we have to start a lot further back, that those assumptions aren't there anymore. And we have to start with things that are much more foundational, which 50 years ago people would have assumed about themselves just because it was the culture they were swimming in. Yeah. But we're not swimming in the same culture.
And I think before we go on to questions, I mean, I've had a good week. I don't know about you, Steve, but I've had a good week. It's maybe because I've been part of the Connect thing and the Lord has blessed me. And this is my version of prosperity theology. But I've had a good week. And I can give you 3 examples. One is a journalist who has suddenly completely changed and started asking me about Christ in a non-mocking way. Mm-hmm. The other is a lawyer. I was doing an online event last night and there was a lawyer listening in. It was a legal fellowship. And I just got an excited email from one of the other lawyers. I just issued a challenge saying, how can you condemn the Bible if you've never read it? If you're a lawyer, you want your jury to be the jury that says, well, we've determined that the guy's guilty because we don't like his looks. I think you and I would both be in trouble if we were in court on that basis. As a lawyer, you want people to hear the evidence and make up their mind on the evidence. So surely you as a lawyer are going to make up your mind. And apparently this non-Christian guy who came and phoned up his friend, said, I love that. He said, I want to start reading the Bible with you. But then I think one of the most open group, apart from the Chinese, I think Chinese culture is very open to the gospel. I think in Australia, there's a group of people I keep coming across. And for me personally, I just think so open to the gospel. And I'm not even sure if this is an offensive term, so please forgive me, anyone. I'm a foreigner, so forgive me. Tradies. I love the tradies. Every tradie I've ever met, I've had such a good laugh with. And I've got to tell you this story. So we had a tradie coming into our house to mend something. And I was out and my wife texted me and said, I've just had the most amazing conversation. This guy had gone online. He'd somehow, I don't know, heard something and got my name. And he'd gone online and saw that I was called the Wee Flea. So he went onto my website because he thought I was a pest controller. And he was looking for a pest controller. And he started reading it all, and it's mostly stuff about the gospel.
Yeah.
And we just had a fabulous conversation when I got back. I got back as quick as I could. I loved the guy. I thought he was so open. He was kind of left field. Now, one was very influenced by Anglicanism. Another was, I don't know what the lawyer was, whether he was influenced by anything or just an atheistic background. And another, and the Anglican one was also very influenced. He lived in an Orthodox community in West Sydney. But another, the tradie, was very influenced by Hillsong and charismatic, and he'd had some connection with a friend who had a connection who had a connection. I reckon there are very few people in Australia who are any more than 3 steps away from a connection with a church.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to start with. That we don't start with a blank slate, for good or ill. So in some senses, that gives us ground to work with.
Yeah.
But you have to say over the last 10 to 15 years, that gives us a ground to repair as well, doesn't it? Because the 4 things that you said about Christianity, is it beautiful, true,
reasonable,
and good?
Yeah.
Yes. Those things are all up for grabs in some respects, aren't they, for people?
Right, folks, we're going to go to questions. I'm going to hand you back to our presenters who, can you please ask questions? And when you ask questions, let us know where you're from as well, so we'll give a shout out to you. But please ask questions, because otherwise they're going to grill us, and I'm terrified of them grilling us, so I'd prefer you lot.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Rebecca,
I'm not terrified of anybody. Hey, this is Nathan from CMAA here, and joining us is Rebecca Hoover, again from Townsville. Well, ladies first, please, Beck.
Oh, I've got a good one for you. You guys had to bring up Donald Trump and the Bible, which has been all over our news feed. But I think the bigger issue that's going on right now is the racism conversation. And I think we see so much on social media, but I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg on social media. There's so much that people are thinking about, talking about privately. How do we use this moment, and how do we speak into this at the moment?
Oh, that's a great question. And I would love to defer to David, but I should answer it first.
That's your racist. That's why. It's because I'm Scottish.
I've thought long and hard about it, because I usually write about a lot of things, and I haven't written about it yet, because I'm not quite sure how to articulate something that a lot of people have articulated in different ways. One of the things I want to say is that the desire and deep desire for justice, it didn't come out of nowhere. I think that's part of what you want to start with people, that if we are just making this up as we go along, the reflex we have towards injustice just doesn't make sense. And I think a great book to read on that, even though he's not a Christian, is The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, who deals with how we're actually put together. There's something instinctual in us that reflexes towards things that are wrong or right. And I think that's built within us. So what you want to say in those situations, and as you see someone holding a Bible, and I don't want to see any more politicians holding Bibles for a while. I just don't want to see that, because I feel like I want to say, the first step I would say is, left and right in politics will offer you left and right answers.
Yeah.
But the kingdom of God isn't going to land on your side, because you can both be a victim of something, but in God's eyes, we are also perpetrators against his holiness. And starting there disarms left and right, or else it enrages them. I'm not quite sure. It's a bit of both at times. But I think we want to be very careful that we acknowledge injustice, and we say, but at the same time, we're not going to find heaven on earth if it's broken people like us creating it. Because my wife is from South Africa. She left South Africa as a mixed-race South African, where her parents couldn't vote. They couldn't have jobs where they wanted. She left there as someone who went to a school which was for coloured people only. And the current South African government is just as powerful and nepotistic as the previous one, no matter how they've switched it up. It doesn't seem that justice is happening in a way that we want it to, and we cry out for it. So I think the cry for justice is a transcendent issue as much as anything. Dave?
Yeah, and can I please make a plea with people? Don't join one of the tribes. Don't get caught up in one of these arguments about, look, systemic racism is a real problem, which it is, by the way. It is a real problem. And then, therefore, we have we need to support people even if they're rioting, or don't be one of these people who's tweeting out Floyd's criminal record as though that somehow justifies what happens to him. Yet people get stuck in this argument and join the tribes. We've got to rise above that. That is really important, that we rise above it. And I would when people start going about this, I want to go a wee bit deeper. I want to say, do you know, I've got a really interesting idea here that I'm just hearing on the radio. Do races actually exist? And what do we mean by race? Is it a social construct? What's going on here? And I want to say things like, you are aware that there were 27 black lives that were lost this week in Mali. They were executed by extremist Islamists. Racism is in every culture, and we need to know how to deal with it. In Australia, we do need to. I say this as an outsider, and people carry guilt and all the rest of it. And it's complex, I know. But what's not complex is the fact that Indigenous people were treated really badly in the past and still are today in some instances. And I think we, as a church, we acknowledge that. And I do think reading John Harris's One Blood is really, really important.
Yeah.
I want to say this: are all races equal? And I think people go, "Oh yeah, of course." And I'm going to say, why? What's your reason for thinking that? My reason is because we're all made in the image of God. My reason is because of Adam and Eve. My reason is because of common ancestor, if you want to put it that way, using the lingo. And I actually think that the doctrine of equality in our culture and society doesn't have a solid ground, reasonable ground. And that's back to the reasonable, the beautiful, the good, and the true. So I'm saying, look, it's reasonable to believe that all races are equal. Why is it reasonable? It's also beautiful. When you go to a church, I remember a guy coming to me one time who was a militant atheist, and he said, "David, I just don't get this. Everything that we believe, you practice. So you've got all different races in your church, all different ages." He says, "We don't have that. We're a bunch of middle-aged white male atheists, basically." And you just saw it. He saw there was something beautiful there, and that it was good. And then it's true. Why is it true? Because God has made all people in his image. And that is a fundamental doctrine that we can teach to people. And I think a lot of people just go, what?
Yeah, and I would say the key for me, though, is that it works, because if it's not seen to work, we've got a problem. And I think part of our apologetic as the church is to acknowledge that sometimes it hasn't been seen to work. Yeah. And it would be terrible if the refugees from a cultural tsunami washed up on our shore and said to us in our churches, "So how do you lot do forgiveness? How do you lot do purity? How do you lot do justice?" And we go, "Just the same as the culture." And they walk away with their heads down because there's no hope. We've got a church for showing what that looks like, and creating something that looks like it's beautiful and true, but it works as well. I think that's important. Sorry, Nate.
Sorry. The Iggy Pop's image up there, my first response to that, and especially when you mentioned it, like, whoa, is that, I'm mucking around in my brain, is that blasphemy? Well, maybe, that's how I took it immediately when you said, because here he is, the Christ figure.
Yes.
Even everybody's wanting to touch him, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's very blasphemous. And, what's rising up in me is like, do I need to defend that? And of course I don't need to defend Christ, but it's also in a society that's like, well, what you're talking about, and I think Estelle, hello Estelle, we know you're in Singapore, lovely to have you as part of this summit, but she's made a point there. I think what you're saying, Dave, is this correct? And Steve, instead of actually telling the world what they can't do, because we so often jump to that as the church, right? Right, we're onto that. Isn't it showing the beauty and the truth of that, or actually twisting, or not twisting is the wrong term, but sorry, I'll throw to you. I'm not being very eloquent in my question, but how is it?
Yeah, look, I think for me, as I look at it, I go, the first thing to do is take a deep breath, because I think, that's replacing Jesus. Is that what it's doing? And it's Paul in Acts 17 being a bit distressed at the idolatry of the people, and then going on to speak to it. And I think that's part of the issues that at one level you get annoyed by it, but at another level you see the yearning within it. that is too easily satisfied.
Yeah, it's the core of the human heart, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's C.S. Lewis's idea that we're too easily satisfied, not too hard to please. We'll just jump at anything, sex, food, pleasure, leisure, to try and fill that void, and it doesn't match it. And the best atheist of all that I've ever heard speak about it was David Foster Wallace, when he spoke at the Kenyan college commencement address with that famous "This is Water" speech, where he's speaking to the creative geniuses of the world who are going to be the next PR people, journalists, media people in America. And he does this great speech called "This is Water," and he talks about the two little goldfish swimming around the bowl, and Grandpa Goldfish comes swimming around and says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And they go, "What's water?" And then he commences to deconstruct the modern, liberal, secular, progressive narrative of an arts student and says, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's no such thing as an atheist. Everybody worships. The only difference you get when you choose is what to worship. And a good reason to worship a God type thing is that anything else you worship will eat you alive. Worship fame and money, you'll never feel you've got enough. Worship beauty and sexual allure, you'll always feel ugly. And then the killer line is at the end, and he says, "And you will die 1,000,000 deaths before they finally bury you." And everyone cheers, "Yay, great speech," you know. And he's just devastated them with transcendence, or the lack of it. And I think he did that in a way that honoured them, that got them hooked in for more, but it undermined them at the same time. And I think that's part of the issue. How do you use what people are doing to honour them, and undermine that narrative at the same time? That's the trick.
But okay. Also, you said turn it. I would say this, and I want to ask Rebecca something, so just be ready. I would say you not twist it, but you let it bounce back. So someone fires a bullet, if you like, or throws a shot at you, and you say, "You really want to go there? Okay, let's go there," and get them to answer their own question, or get them to see how that fits. So things can bounce back. So the equality thing, I would just simply say, where do you get it from? Apart from a nice idea, where does it come from? Because I can give you an intellectual, and I can give you a reasonable case for equality. I want to hear yours, not just, "Oh, we're all for equality." Give me the reason. I was going to ask Rebecca, sorry, when we did we were talking about the race thing and all the rest of it. I mean, it is really, really important, and there are, different relationships as well. People would say about the church being misogynistic for different reasons. Is that a question that you come across, particularly, as a woman, that you feel either I go, "Yeah, they are, and I'm going to sort them out," or you find yourself being quite defensive, or is it not as simple as that? Sorry for asking you about it.
I think there are some similarities to both discussions, actually, to be totally honest, because I am a woman and I do work and have a career, and I feel like I've been very, I feel very privileged, I guess, because it's the word at the moment, that I've had men in my life that have championed me. I have a fabulous husband, a fabulous father, a fabulous boss. In fact, Nathan, you sent out a survey last year about women in media, and I answered those questions and went, wow, I'm really privileged. And so I do get surprised when I hear comments from colleagues of mine. And I think that's where, what I think we need to be doing right now, or what I'm learning, is that I need to be listening to a greater degree, because everyone's experience is not my own. And if people are lamenting, how do I make space for that in my life and understand that everyone's experience isn't my own?
Yeah. Actually, people are asking how to do this. One word we didn't say, and probably because we're not very good at it, is listen.
Yeah.
you gotta listen. You gotta listen to the culture. You gotta listen to people around you. You gotta, and you've also got to appreciate people. I mean, I really meant what I said about the tradie guys that I've met. They're just absolutely brilliant. They've helped me so much in understand Australia and communicating. I would go out and talk to them. A couple of the guys told me of a pub where I'm just going to go and listen to them. I think that's a great thing. Do we have any other questions?
I thought an interesting question. Rodney's asked about, if we're wanting to use contemporary culture to talk about the gospel, how do we regain the platform? And I thought his follow-up question was interesting. His comment is that many Christians no longer have connection to those who don't know Jesus. And I think that's a really important thought to consider. Steve, maybe to you, because you talked about the start of this is our public and our private life. We actually have to care about people. So I'd love to hear your response to that.
I guess part of our problem to begin with is maybe 20 to 30 years ago, we started to get into our bunkered down communities, and we ran silos of Christian silos in the sense that run parallel to the culture. So we created subcultural frameworks. So, and you can see how that's happening anyway, tribally, in not just Christianity, but in lots of things. And the hard thing is we've spent a lot of time creating an alternative ecosystem of Christian this, Christian that, Christian the other. And I'm not saying they're bad things, but they suck a lot of time. And the question is, I think that there are certain people who are very good at being able to be crossover people. I don't think everyone has to be the crossover person between the culture that's secular and the church. Some people would be very cack-handed at it. Some people may not want to go there. But there are some people who I think are capable of crossing over between those, bridging that cultural gap. And I think that's part of the things. Identify those people and then champion them, because what often happens is they get a little burnt by both sides of the equation. And Christians maybe don't understand those Christians who are pushing hard into the arts. I heard Anna McGann speaking last year, fantastic, and her book Metanoia. She was speaking at something that our group City Bible Forum put on at their lecture, the Smith lecture. It's great if you can find it. And just as I listened to her, I realised, wow, you are a Christian woman in an industry that is really hard to be a Christian in. It's not just about her speaking into that. She's part of that. She's an actor in a setting which has raised the Me Too movement because of all that's gone on. And I think those are the kind of people you need to support and champion. I think it's hard. I think you've got to find the right kind of people who are mature enough who can bridge those gaps and help both. It isn't for everyone, otherwise it looks a bit cack-handed, I think. It's who are the people that you can identify that can create those bridges. And often it's people who've come the other way, who haven't been Christian, have become Christian and go, I've got a window into both cultures. I think we need to work to identify those people. That'd be great.
Guys, as you know, you've been here, David, for a while, and you are quite interested. You openly admitted you didn't like Christian music to me the first time I met you.
Oh dear.
It's okay. We had a fight, and I'm over it now. But when it comes to the blended format stations here, do you remember what you shared with me at the time? And what are your thoughts about, and how far do we go, I guess, or where is there a line? Is there a line? Because it's attractional in terms of reaching culture with things that are familiar, but is there a line and between? And I'll ask a follow-up question: what is Christian music and what is secular music? Is there a the famous quote about, is there Christian music, a Christian building, or a Christian potato? It's actually, when I said that, somebody sent me a photograph of a potato with a cross on it. So I got but no, look, I've had to repent of my ways and various things. I'm not happy with the term Christian music, and for lots and lots of different reasons. But I understand, where that comes in. I mean, I once did a secular music show on a Christian radio station, which was basically playing secular songs and commenting about them. I got fired because I criticized Cliff Richard once, so that was just a black bar. But it was you can understand that. But I've been thinking a lot about why things are different. I was used to Christian radio stations being very niche, very limited, and very, very much for Christians, although they said they were outreach. Since coming here, the statistic that just blew my mind was the fact that up to 25% of Australians listen to Christian radio. Now, I don't think it's because they've got a particular interest in the gospel. Many will be Christians, but it's because I've listened to other radio here, and most of it's rubbish, and also blasphemous and filth as well. And they're just thinking on the school run, I'm going to go
Christian radio, and I'm not going to get any, any sexual innuendo. So that's one thing. I do think you have to avoid the danger of being bland, though. And I've gone on to radio stations, and they've said, can we play a piece of music for you? And I've suggested something. Said, oh, we can't play that. It doesn't fit and I'm saying, no, guys, this is not good. You need to, the biggest audience I ever got for an interview was one I did with a heavy metal rock station. They phoned me up and said, we've read your book. We've got this guy, a presenter, who wants to do an interview with you. He's an atheist. And I thought, this is going to be easy. And, I heard him begin, and he went, well, there was a bit of Sabbath, and we've got some Zeppelin coming up. And, and anyway, there's this vicar who wrote this book about God. And I thought, this is going to be so easy. This guy hasn't a clue. And then he said, hey, Dave, do you believe in a talking snake? And I knew instantly I was in deep trouble. We had half an hour back and forth. It was meant to be 5 minutes. We had half an hour back and forth live. And at the end, I think it's called Kerrang, actually, not the Kerrang, the Christian music. It was a heavy metal station. And they said to me, David, do you know that by the time the internet's done, 1 million people will have listened to this? And that is the first time they said it was a draw. That is the first time a presenter has not destroyed somebody he's had on. Wow. And you drew. You didn't beat him, but you drew. I said, would you become an official friend? But the figure that struck me, I thought, 1 million?
Yeah.
There's 1 million people listen to me explain the gospel. And I thought, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And that's where I think you guys have a fabulous, I think this is the era of radio. I know this sounds strange, but because of the internet and podcasts and everything else, because of people listening in cars, because of people having, earphones when they go out for a walk, I think that you guys, with your professionalism and with the general wider audience that you have, I would hope you wouldn't lose that. But sometimes you could do with having some things that are just a wee bit more edgy. I'm going on a secular radio station. I'll let you in just a sec, Steve. Okay, I'm going on a secular radio station on Sunday just for a 10-minute interview, and I know they're already sweating. but yeah, Steve, on you go. Sorry.
Yeah, I think what you want to say too is that the modern life has pulled the secular and the sacred apart. Secularism only makes sense in the context of the sacred, because there was the secular world and the sacred world, and they informed each other. And I think they were two big planets that pulled each other together with their gravity. And if you take the sacred out, the secular spins off like this. Mm-hmm. And so I think holding the two worlds in tension that both can inform the other is re-bringing them together is something that I think Christian media has to do in a strong way, because we have isolated one from the other, and they can't operate by themselves. Secularism bleeds away to sort of crass materialism, the nihilism that we see, and the sacred pulled away from the secular ends up with pietism, an individualistic sort of faith for me. Holding those two things in tension is what Christians and Christian media in particular should do, I think.
Yeah.
Estelle has a really good question, and I want to ask one on the way to it. So I'll share what I'm wondering. And it's really, you're giving us some good tips, and I think that's a great challenge, David, that we need to be considering how we integrate this sort of content through our platforms. A part of my question is, how do we know when we're ready? Where's a good starting point? Because you don't want to necessarily jump into the curly stuff and just fall on your face and do more harm than good. And so that's my question. And on the way to that, because I think this is a good context, Estelle's asking, how do we create content about polarizing and sensitive social issues? You started talking about it last week a little bit, but the LGBT, transgenderism, how do we give voices of justice and yet grapple with some of the brokenness that's there as well? So, David, you started to go there, so maybe we'll see what you have to say on this.
Okay. I think that, how do we know? Well, okay, the first part, how do we know? I think, again, we've got to listen, we've got to look at different things. And I think you will see opportunities that come up. You will see, like the James Corden moment. I'm sorry, but if you're a presenter and that moment's gone all over, that's gold dust for you. Mm. Just to simply say, did you see James Corden dad reading the Bible? Mm. That's like an easy win. Now, the second one's much more difficult. And the reason it's difficult is because there's shibboleth issues, which people ask you to find out if you're a nice person or not.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not really waiting for the answer. So my general view with that is it would be to say, we need to understand what's going on in the wider culture. And I would initially either take it very general, so that what we're doing is we're talking about, let's take one issue, the transgender issue. So I'm going to talk about human identity, who we are as human beings. Or you go very particular. So I would mention, I have a friend who's transgender and who's really struggling with this identity thing. And I got a lot of sympathy with them. And, we can't just tribalize this and make it like this. But look, there's a wider issue here. And what I found with this, within the general public, my views on transgender, if ever I go on a radio station or anything like that, a secular radio station, certainly back in Scotland, and it's very secular, far more secular than here, more than 50% of the people who write in, and probably more than 50% of the people who are listening, agree with what I'm saying, though they may not be remotely Christian. And that itself acts as an attractional thing towards the gospel, because there are people saying, oh, this guy's talking sense. Oh, what? You said he was a minister? You're kidding. Yeah. He's religious and he's talking sense. Steve.
Yeah, I think a great book to read on this would be Glenn Harrison's book, A Better Story.
Better Story, yeah.
Fantastic book. And he said, one of the things he says in that book is he's getting to what we talked about at the start, that nothing comes out as a discrete unit in someone's life. It's part of a story. It's part of their web of meaning. And central and to people's web of meaning at the moment, because of the way the culture has created things over the last, say, 6 to 7 decades, is our sexual identity is the core of our meaning and our identity, who we are sexually. That's not a given, but it's taken as a given now. And Glenn Harrison says we have to unpack that and show that we have a better story than what that is going to lead to. But part of that better story is, he says, we have to fess up our own story, even though it's better, hasn't presented itself as better in some respects. And so, when you watch a series like Unorthodox on Netflix, you see where a legalistic, closed-minded religious community can go. And it chafes at us a little bit. Even as a Jewish setting, it chafes at you because you recognise, and I come from Northern Ireland, I've seen what that can do, those closed communities, where the gospel isn't at the centre. And in one sense, the better story is the gospel story. And I tell the story of here's a story I tell of my mum being conceived out of wedlock in a very strict Brethren household in Northern Ireland. Her parents get married before anyone knows she's pregnant. They go down to Dublin, they have her, they give her away till the age of 8 when her parents are divorced, and come back and steal her out of her foster parents' home, who she thought was her real mother, overnight in a car, and she never sees them again. And I said, people say we've got to get back to the 1950s morality. Do you think that my mum at 75, still living the pain of that, thinks that's a better story because it was the Christian story at the time? That's not the gospel. And I want us to unpack and strip away some of the presuppositions that we have as well to start with gospel and say, I want to show you the gospel story that is a parody of. Because some of our stories are no more gospel than some of the other identity stories that were being pitched. So I think the first thing is to be honest with ourselves. That's why a series like Unorthodox was so gripping, because it wasn't our story, but it spoke about our story. And the liberty at the end of it, even though it was sexual liberty and, sort of freedom in a big city like Berlin, is a salvation story. all stories are the same. They've just got different salvations at the end of them. And you want to say, how do you lean into that to say that's a great story and a great narrative build-up, but let me show you something that's even better than that. And I think we can start that way with stories. But part of that's listening to other people's stories.
So when it comes to this recently, Ravi Zacharias passed away. These great and wonderful preachers. Are you saying that are we in a time, in a cultural moment where they're not as effective, do you believe, as they once were, or do you say that they still have their place? I mean, what's your opinion?
I'll go with this one. We did a survey in Edinburgh in Scotland on the top 10 churches, growing churches. And it was from, charismatic, Baptist, Presbyterian, independent, and so on. And it was a secular newspaper who did this survey. And this secular newspaper came up with the conclusion that the number one reason these churches were growing, all of them, was because of the teaching they were getting. And it was quite a shocking thing. Now, out of that teaching, I would argue, came the praise, came the good works and everything else. But we had a different message. And I do think that preaching is absolutely essential. However, I think in Australia, in the UK and elsewhere in the West, apart from maybe America, big name celebrity preachers forget. They're not big name anywhere in the world, right?
Yeah.
They're big name within our context.
Yeah.
But they're not, it's quite funny because like my kids always, keep me right. And they say, Dad, you're a big name in a very small part of a very small church. Yeah. In the wider world, who cares? Nobody knows. That's I'm trying to arrange an interview with a very famous person at the moment, and there people go back and said, well, who are you? Why would we do an interview with you? And I wrote them back and said, I'm nobody. That's why you would do it. And we'll see if that works. But I just think celebrity
challenge trying to get Russell Brand, my friend, and keep going.
So celebrity preachers, we need good preachers. And yes, there are some people who have an awesome gift that if they come and preach, I think if John Lennox, for example, came to any city in Australia, it wouldn't be difficult to get 1,000 people. But most of them would be Christians, and it would only work if those Christians took along a non-Christian friend, because the non-Christian friend hasn't heard of John Lennox. Yeah. But we have, and we know it will be good. And there are other things like that as well. So I think the age of preaching is not gone, but I hope the age of the celebrity preacher is gone. And I do think the age of stadium preaching has largely gone, not entirely. And I wouldn't object if it came back. I don't have a problem theologically with it. I just think culturally, you couldn't do a 1950s Billy Graham crusade now. You just couldn't. And you shouldn't want to. It's gone. That's gone.
I think this time that we're seeing now, and I hope that there's many of our new media professionals, the pastors out there that are watching this, either live now or on demand in replay, but I think it's probably the time of relational preaching, right? And that's the opportunity that we each have that this COVID time has certainly given us. So, Rebecca, I'll let you. We're going to need to wrap up in a few minutes, but I'll let you grace us with a quick.
Yeah, I think you've given some really provocative challenges, particularly to media and to the church. Some would be listening that are sort of more generically interested. And again, coming back to the personal life, I'd love to hear from you, Steve. What is your personal challenge to us? What's one takeaway you would like to see each one of us listening go away with and implement?
Oof, that's a big call. I think, be transparent. Authenticity is the buzzword of our culture. And if you can fake authenticity, you've got it made, right? But just living a transparent life before people where you go, this is who I am and here are my faults. Because everyone has to live a curated life at the moment. Because you will get taken down, social media or whatever, if you're not living this curated life. And I think a transparent life has something safe about it that people want to hang around. And I want to come back to Jesus at the start, where a woman who touches his clothes is an outcast in religiously, not morally, but ceremonially. She's a woman. She's going through this long-term medical problem. And he's the holiest, cleanest man on the planet. And she's not afraid of him. Whereas I think people who don't know Jesus look at most of the holy people and go, if I told them what I was like, they would hate me because they're not like that. They've got no foible. And Jesus is the most transparent person and the holiest person ever. And she wants to go near him and touch him. I don't think we're at that stage yet. And I think if we got there, that would be a bad thing, as just being that level of transparency, I think, about ourselves.
Dave, a couple of final words.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I mean, Yeah, I agree with Steve. He's very, very wise. You should all listen to him. But I think that if my challenge to answer that question, I would say if you're watching this, the challenge is for you, for me, for all of us as the individual people of God to share Christ in the culture that we are, not the culture that we'd like to be. You know, we don't live in the 17th century or whatever, and stop lamenting that. We live in a broken world, and in the 17th century, in the first century, it was a broken world as well. So we've got this marvelous opportunity just now, and I think particularly in Australia and New Zealand, I think as an outsider, I'm saying you have got a window here which is brilliant, and I would say it's a triangle because the church needs to do this. You know, the church as a collective body, or the local church in particular, people need to see Christ in action. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. That's the church. And then the third part of the triangle, I would say, is secular and Christian and social media. And somehow the church, and in particular Christian media, but also secular media, journalists in secular media and producers and others need support and prayer and encouragement, not condemnation. Why don't you have a gospel show on the ABC every single night and you're an ABC journalist? I'm sorry, that's a ridiculous statement. And it's an ignorant statement, and it doesn't help. But I think we need to be praying for the spies, if you like, the infection, and we need for the kind of more open media, if you like, the Christian ones. But to me, it's going to be crucial, and this Connect conference, that Christian media and the church work together. Neither see themselves as the old. Too many churches just look at Christian media and say, we're not interested, and don't see it as a tool. And sometimes in Christian media, we think the church is irrelevant. We're going to do it. You're not going to do it without the church. But I honestly don't think the church is going to do it without media. And we have to work in all those areas, the social media, the secular media, and Christian media, and the crossovers between them.
Wonderful, Dave. And let me just say that the members of CMAA certainly understand that they're here as servants of the church. So if you're listening to this, that's our posture, how we approach the church. We don't exist for ourselves. We exist for the church. Well, look, thank you so much, David and Steve and Rebecca, for being with us. Great conversation. And if you are wanting to connect with these guys, Third Space is the location to just Google Third Space. And they're so approachable, have some wonderful resources as well, part of City Bible Forum in each state of Australia. So look them up, check them out. Also, just a couple of things to end off. We're nearly finished our live sessions for the week, but you can view everything on replay on demand. It'll all be available for the next 60 days at least if you're in the summit. So please avail yourselves of some of the brilliant content if you haven't seen it. Even if it's not on your schedule, you can go back and look at everything that we've had during the week. Also, just want to congratulate Fish Films and Jude Kalman for winning the 2020 Graham Wade Pilgrim Media Prize, $10,000 for her work, which is just beautiful work that she did for Mission Educate. That awards excellence in media. So that was awarded today. And also just coming up this afternoon, in fact, it's about to start now, some conversations with Tim Costello. And tonight, don't forget that we have the amazing For King and Country, two guys that I actually babysat as kids, so and licked envelopes for their dad's mailing list. God has a sense of humour. But don't miss those guys, and it'll be live streaming on Facebook from 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you very much to you, David, to you, Steve, to you, Rebecca.
Guys.
Until next time, thank you very much for being part of this conversation. We'll see you very soon.